Is blockchain the future of age assurance? It is if you ask Evin McMullen, CEO of Billions Network, and today's guest on the Biometric Update Podcast. She joins us to talk about the opportunity Billions sees for the chain in age proofs and beyond. I'm Joel McConvey, and here's my conversation with Billions Network's Evin McMullen.
So Billions Network is here to save the internet in the age of AI.
Ooh.
We are the first universal human and AI network built with mobile-first verification. So that means you can use the devices you already have, such as your phone or your computer, to prove who you are online, on-chain, and even in real life, meaning the ability to prove that you are a human and not a bot, that you're a unique individual, different than other users, that you live at a certain location, that you are of a certain age, or even things like your KYC status and more, without revealing the underlying private data about yourself. So, for example, being able to prove that you're over the age of 21 without revealing the date of your birthday. Billions Network was founded on the belief that identity does not need to mean handing over all of your data, but rather we can enable people to make high consent, privacy first, verifiable claims about themselves rooted in trusted organizations such as government IDs or trusted data like biometrics with minimal exposure of personal data. So we began with research in decentralized identity, zero-knowledge proofs, the ability to prove traits about data without revealing that data. And our team's long history of excellence in that research also includes the fact that we are stewards of the most popular zero-knowledge libraries on Earth, used by organizations from TikTok to HSBC and many thousands in between. Over time, it became clear that proofs like age assurance online are some of the highest leverage use cases, relevant today. So the ability to, prove things like a range of your age without handing over, as I said, sort of that personal data such as your birthday. And so by using the devices that you already have instead of proprietary data, by building with open standards that are natively interoperable with the technology systems we use today, as well as forward-thinking and sort of frontier technologies like AI and crypto, we are able to bridge trusted data from one environment to another without losing the integrity of that information. Our capabilities also extend to AI agents. Meaning that we can create unique identities for instances of AI agents and relate those accountably back to the individual or group, like an organization, that controls them. Because, of course, you cannot have accountability without identity. And so for agent-to-agent interactions, stablecoin payments and digital payments as machine money, we need to know who we are paying. We need to be able to identify those non-human actors that are performing tasks on our behalf. So our core team includes cryptographers, engineers, product leaders, and experts in digital trust across the board. And so through our application and protocol ecosystem, we are building real-world tools that make it easy to interact with platforms for compliance, access control, and trust without giving up more than necessary or requiring those platforms to take on more risk than is necessary.
All right. So how does one sign up for Billions Network? Is it an enrollment thing? I mean, where do biometrics fit into the picture? Is it just on device in terms of, you're sort of sharing the data that you carry on your device and the biometrics on your device are authenticating you? How does it, give me a bit more on the nuts and bolts of how Billions Network is verifying people, is verifying age?
Certainly. So we support not only a native application, which users worldwide, more than 2 million of them have already downloaded to their mobile devices from their usual app stores. We also support tools like an SDK so that our capabilities can be popped into existing websites or other applications so you don't actually have to leave the digital experience that you're having to prove something such as your age. We have two methods of being able to prove a user's age with different sort of levels of assurance. The first is integration with more than 100 different government ID systems. So one unique capability that our native application has is that you can take your passport, if it has an NFC chip in it, you can tap it to your phone, pull the data from your passport out of that NFC chip onto your device. Keep it securely under your control, so it is cryptographically protected from anyone accessing that data on your device. Even we, Billions Network, cannot see it, cannot touch it. And then once that data is on your device, then you can generate what's called a zero-knowledge proof about that data, meaning you could create a proof, kind of like a green light or a thumbs up, showing that you are above a certain age, and then send that proof of age to an application that's requesting that you prove that you're over a certain age. We also have integrated with national ID systems in addition to passports. So, for example, Aadhaar, which is the national ID system of India. And then the other method where we're able to use biometrics to estimate age, we've developed in conjunction with our partners at a company called Privately, with the support of the European Commission. And that utilizes sort of images of your face to be able to estimate age. But again, Billions Network does not have the ability to interact with, take, or manipulate any of that private data about you. That stays with you.
Gotcha. So thank you very much for that. That's pretty thorough. Let's talk about age assurance and what's happening right now, because the sector is really kind of changing almost by the day, given the regulations. Things are popping up all the time that need, or that certain people think need, restrictions on age. So my question to you is, what's the opportunity here for Billions Network, for providers to service this growing market?
Certainly. So, age-based access controls have long been a challenge for those building, services and applications and content in digital space. In fact, the Child Online Privacy Protection Act in the United States, which limits age-based access control for certain types of interaction and content, has really been the sort of party line that many businesses look to. But we are now seeing a massive regulatory wave worldwide on this subject. So, for example, the UK's recent Online Safety Act, or OSA, explicitly requires, quote unquote, highly effective age assurance, which is defined for, open banking, photo ID, facial estimations, mobile operator checks, credit cards, and other forms of identity as acceptable methods, but they reject simple self-declaration, which to this point has been, the sort of standard practice for many providers in digital space. I'm sure your listeners are probably familiar with websites that ask you to check a box or manually enter your birthday to confirm your age.
Oh, yes.
But these new rules are not theoretical, right? Platforms that host adult or restricted content are required to implement these robust age checks, or they can face very serious compliance risks and fines. So, internationally, I think regulatory frameworks are catching up to a similar place. For example, recent reports have highlighted that age estimation and sort of privacy trade-offs are kind of at an all-time high in terms of political sensitivity and concern. But as we were saying earlier, this creates a massive opportunity. Identity and age assurance are not just a compliance checkbox; they're becoming a foundational layer for safer digital experiences, but only if conducted in a mindful and scalable way. Because the potential downside risks of censorship, of false positives and restriction of content online may have chilling effects beyond the safety that's initially intended.
Mm-hmm. I notice you didn't mention the sort of age inference, the algorithmic age inference method, which is something that YouTube has started using for its users. And I know you have some thoughts on why this isn't the best idea. Can you give us the skinny on YouTube's age assurance system and why you think it's not ideal?
Indeed. So, one of the most talked about recent moves in this space is, as you mentioned, YouTube's rollout of an AI-powered age estimation system for subsets of its users. This means that rather than relying solely on a self-attested birth date entered by a user, as many other platforms do, YouTube instead incorporates behavioral signals of those user accounts. such as the content that individuals are watching, the categories that they're viewing, their search history, and the longevity of their account, or sort of the tenure of their account, how long it has existed, to infer whether or not a user is under the age of 18. Challenge is that if a system flags a user as a minor, YouTube applies age-appropriate restrictions, so no personalized ads, screen time reminders, limiting certain content. But this is not, the challenge here is not without controversy, because civil liberties and privacy advocates have warned that inference-based age estimation is, a massive risk for misclassification, surveillance, and a loss of anonymity. We've already seen that users on Reddit have identified AI as misflagging or miscategorizing adult accounts as minors and vice versa. So there's a concern that YouTube will continue to tighten the gate here, leveraging age not just for safety, but rather for controlling which content is recommended or monetized, which could be seen as the first step in normalizing AI-based age verification tied to censorship.
Mm-hmm. There are people who have similar concerns or have expressed similar concerns about facial age estimation in terms of it misclassifying people, blocking people who are 16, let's say, from entering their social media account because it estimates them to be 14. What's your sort of defense of facial age estimation in that tech?
So, I think, of course, the question really is about the larger user experience that's offered. So, in the example of YouTube, there is an appeal path where users who disagree with that automated outcome can verify their government ID, or a credit card. However, that's really a potential sticking point where the collection of private data as a solution in clear text then opens the opportunity to have to disclose more than is necessary. And I would also say that inference is fundamentally probabilistic. So of course it can produce false positives. Adults can be judged as minors or vice versa. And this misclassification at scale undermines trust, especially when the stakes are high. Mm-hmm. So relying on behavioral traits, YouTube is essentially building profiles of these users, which does raise a concern about whether this form of surveillance, or rather, this is a form of surveillance under the guise of safety. As we discussed, even if appeals are offered, requiring the revelation of sensitive personal data kind of defeats the purpose of minimal disclosure. Mm-hmm. Once a gate like that is in place, there's a risk of mission creep, right? What starts as age safety could become a control mechanism over what content is allowed or recommended or monetizable for different user groups if that process is opaque.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and trust obviously is very important because anytime people observe someone to be breaching that trust, it sort of sets everything back for everyone in the space who's trying to convince people that we have your best interests in mind. So that leads me to what Billions Network is working with, which is blockchain-based technology. And you're seeing more firms adopt this model for age assurance for that use case. So can you tell me a bit about how, about these decentralized technologies have kind of matured beyond the kind of origin in cryptocurrency and what the potential is moving forward with these kinds of protocols and networks?
Certainly. So, when you say the word crypto, many people think cryptocurrency, mm-hmm. not cryptography, which is the sort of mathematical basis of being able to verify information that also underpins blockchain technology. So, blockchains now are not just about currency. They are trust layers that allow us to anchor verifiable claims, such as the claim of age based on a passport, in a way that is tamper-resistant and verifiable without storing that actual data on chain. So you can think of a blockchain as, write once, never erase, but you can update. So in the context of regulation, that's really powerful because you can comply with laws and emerging regulations such as those in the UK and EU in a way that also respects the privacy and consent of users. So we in the Billions Network team have been building in this space and on this technology for nearly a decade, and the maturity of the ecosystem is now at a point where blockchains are fast and cheap and flexible enough to support these types of interactions. However, if we go back to 2017, 2018, if you wanted to generate a zero-knowledge proof, you couldn't do it in a couple seconds on your mobile device as you can today, thanks to the work of folks like our teammates. Rather, you were going to be sitting at a desktop computer for upwards of 30 minutes, crossing your fingers and hoping that something would generate. And so now, our circuits and underlying technology are much more efficient and swift. And also the user experience, the interfaces, the buttons that we click and see are now much more closely designed to the digital experiences we're used to, instead of the sort of clumsy early interfaces of blockchain applications, which, remind many users of the early days of the internet.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, is it a challenge for you to try and sort of distinguish what Billions Network is doing and everything you just went through from the kind of stigma that has attached to cryptocurrency in a sense?
So I think that all users of the internet are able to identify with the challenge of more than half of online content and interactions coming from unidentified, unaccountable bots. And the plague of, filling out forms and onboarding, having to reintroduce yourself every time you go to a new app or a new website like it is your first day on the internet. And so, by using available technologies such as cryptographic tools to solve these very real problems, I think our work and our message is much more focused on tangible use cases with meaningful outcomes that change the way that we interact online. And when we explain the underlying elements of this technology that include cryptography, that's sort of a secondary element versus starting with the call it cryptocurrency industry as a point of understanding and awareness that's essential to be able to benefit in this way.
It's interesting because the way people speak about this tech and brand it and package it really kind of matters. And this leads me to a question about some other people working in this space. Particularly, you have what I assume would be seen as a fairly large competitor in the World Network. Are these people, is Sam Altman and his crew someone you see as a competitor in the space with what they're trying to do? Or are there distinguishing features here in terms of what Billions Network is aiming for?
While we in the World team think about many of the same challenges, our approaches are fundamentally different, both in terms of the values and architecture that we espouse, but also in terms of objective. Mm-hmm. Certainly, there are many other identity and blockchain-related protocols working on parts of this problem, but they are not focused on privacy first, minimal disclosure, and accessibility to all as first principles. So, for example, in the World ecosystem, they require proprietary hardware. The orbs, silver bowling balls that you stare into that capture your irises in their proprietary data form. This, of course, does not utilize standard issue hardware, but furthermore, they also leverage, as we were saying, data that is not interoperable, that does not talk to legacy systems, that cannot interact in multi-chain environments, and that is not based on the standard data forms that the rest of the world uses. So, rather than monetizing the bodies of the global south, instead, we are working hand in hand with entities like governments and enterprise to ensure the security, privacy, and autonomy of their users, within the rights they have as citizens. So, unlike World, we have never been banned or sanctioned by any government. Unlike World, we have never been sort of face consequences for inappropriately handling data about children, for example, or inappropriately handling, private personal data that is regulated in specific ways. So we take a very different approach and do not see governments as competitors. We have no intention of renting, governments back lists of their own citizens or undermining their currency, with incentives from outside, but rather to modernize and improve upon the infrastructure that's already there.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good objective and a pretty good record by comparison.
Yeah. I would say also, perhaps just from a more of a technical and architectural difference as well, we do not rely on a centralized server with permissioned accounts. Meaning, sort of a difference with Billions Network is that we cannot decide to delete a user account at will. We do not control the ability for an individual to manage or interact with their own data, and we have no ability to intervene or modify it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. Obviously there's a bit of a race going on, or at least a evolution in tandem, and this technology is becoming more and more integrated into things we need, like age assurance. So I like to ask everyone, where do you see yourself and Billions Network in, let's say, 3 years, given how quickly everything is changing?
So, I think in the next 3 years, call it by 2028, I imagine that Billions Network will become one of the foundational infrastructure layers for regulated digital safety. I think that identity and fundamentally traits like age in a digital form are critical national infrastructure, and that the ability to prove things like age assurance will be one important use case, but not the only one. We expect to see broad adoption by platforms that are under regulatory pressure during this time, not just in the UK or places where these laws are already popping up, but globally, especially as age assurance becomes mandated or strongly encouraged in more and more territories. I also predict that zero-knowledge age proofs will become a standard part of consent flows, where users will be able to authenticate their age without revealing sensitive data to every single website, creating duplicate copies of it, sort of scattered across the web. And that will make digital interactions smoother, safer, and more consensual. And finally, Billions will push further into other trust-based use cases, such as live interactions between businesses, and even interactions between humans and AI agents.
Mm-hmm. And so last question is, this will all be happening in the context of a world that is embracing digital ID. Theoretically, you have big changes happening in the UK. They're trying to implement a scheme. Aadhaar is an example of a huge national digital identity network. So where does Billions Network fit in this larger digital identity evolution?
You can think of Billions Network as the connective tissue between digital identity systems and the rest of the internet. Today, many digital or digitally related government ID systems are not portable. They cannot, be leveraged to interact with websites and applications built by private companies, nor are they verifiable, meaning that, you constantly need to go back to the source to check their validity.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think that sort of brings us to the end of our conversation, but I really appreciate you joining us today. And it's certainly a fascinating space to watch, and I appreciate your comments and your insights.
I'm grateful for your thoughtful questions, and welcome the opportunity to speak again should that be helpful. Thank you again so much.
Absolutely. All right, have a great day. Thanks for listening to the Biometric Update Podcast. For more on Billions Network, visit them online at billions.network. And for all the latest news in biometrics and digital identity, be sure to check out www.biometricupdate.com.